So tonight I've just shared the story about the skepticism over El Salvador's adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender. A lot of the local Salvadorians are currently protesting, and of course internationally, bodies like the IMF, they are incredibly skeptical and also very concerned for the macroeconomic stability of the country if they really were to go through this, which is happening now because the legislation's been passed and they're now this close really to making this a reality. And a lot of you have actually commented and DM'd me about this story I posted, some of you asking me for my opinion, some of you offering your own. And I think we don't really need to speculate too much about this situation. At least it's not really all in the air because believe it or not, and maybe some of you are not aware of this, but El Salvador has actually been running a pilot scheme for a Bitcoin economy since 2019. So there's this beach town called El Zonte where they've effectively set up a local Bitcoin economy. They've got Bitcoin ATMs, they've also got these Bitcoin apps, very much like Venmo, so people can easily transact in Bitcoin. And since getting donation in 2019 from all these anonymous donors, they've really been trying to test how Bitcoin would be like if it were integrated in the economy as a tender. And a lot of people, a lot of supporters of Bitcoin, and especially President, say, look, we've got this Bitcoin beach, and therefore, it's possible. We could actually set this up. But again, I think the challenges that raises skepticism and concern, we don't have to speculate because, again, we just have to investigate El Zonte. Of course, it is a beach town, so, scaling it up to the level of national is totally different. But fundamentally, many of the challenges are very much the same, really. And the truth of it, really, is that if you were to look at El Zonte beyond the press release and really the marketing materials, and you were to look into the investigative reporting that's actually done, then you realize that less than 10% of the transactions there actually happen in Bitcoin. And that's really interesting. And the reason why is, well, first of all, El Zonte itself, like much of El Salvador, is actually relatively underdeveloped. It's not exactly a very developed place. They don't really have the best infrastructure. El Zonte is really quite rural compared to many other places. And the rate of internet penetration there in terms of data connectivity is very low. Even overall on a national level, El Salvador, it's actually not number one, but number two, the lowest connectivity of all of really other countries in that region. Really low connectivity levels, not many people have access to the internet. The second issue really is this, that they don't have access to the devices to have access to the internet, even if internet infrastructure was in place. They don't really have computers, they don't really have smartphones, and if they do have smartphones, not necessarily the best ones or an adequate one that could run these softwares and applications really well. So they don't really have the means to even participate in this digital economy, at least at the moment. They do have this overall issue of actually solving the issue of livelihood for many people and the access to infrastructure first. And really, most of El Salvador, they don't have access to devices, so that is the first thing. And because of that, then of course accepting conventional cash is more preferred. But then the second and biggest issue is this. It is incredibly volatile as a legal tender. This is an issue that, of course, we have talked about in some of my older videos, but really generally understood now that when you want to use Bitcoin, many cryptocurrencies as legal tender in the same sense that you're actually using it as currency, it is incredibly volatile. It could drop at any moment, maybe 30%. But again, every day it is incredibly volatile. Value is moving all over the place. It could be a hike, could be a massive dip. And this is really not conducive to running a business, especially when you're trying to sell your products and your services. You need a consistency in value really to account for running your own business and really your own livelihood. And so the truth is less than 10% of the merchants in El Zonte and really the people living there actually use Bitcoin. And to them, it's actually more or less been a tender that's been forced on them at this point. But it's something that they don't really prefer generally over there, despite all this PR material that we get about the Bitcoin beach. That is the truth. So if we were to look at this from a national level, fundamentally, these issues are the same. As I mentioned, in El Salvador, they don't really have overall infrastructures compared to many other places. They are relatively underdeveloped. Not many people, people living there, actually have access to the internet, and especially access to many of these networks and systems that they have to even participate really in Bitcoin transactions. But then the second thing and the biggest thing is this: volatility is a big issue. Now, we know that in El Salvador, a lot of the families, they actually depend on remittances abroad to survive. A lot of Salvadorians living overseas, sending money back. But of course, we know that remittances are expensive. This is one of the reasons that's been advocated by the president, that they have to have a Bitcoin system in place really to circumvent and overcome these remittance challenges. But if volatility is an issue, the fact that value could move at any moment 30% up and down, then that truly isn't a safe way to move wealth across, especially when you're doing remittances. And this is a serious issue. It actually does have a very big potential to jeopardize the macroeconomic stability of the country. And already we're seeing these things plague El Zonte, the beach. So you can only imagine on a national level how that would actually play out. So it'll be very interesting to see how these developments will unfold really with the current move. But this is why I think a lot of people are quite skeptical of it, and really beyond all the hype and people talking about Bitcoin being adopted as legal tender, this is really the reality. These are the challenges. And the interesting thing about El Salvador is that it isn't the only country. Other countries, particular certain types of countries, like for example Cuba, is also planning to consider to actually implement something similar with Bitcoin, because they've had a US embargo, really, financial sanctions. So they want to use it to circumvent that. And of course, we know Salvador and its relationship with the US dollar. And also we've seen the same thing with Iran. So again, many of these countries are trying to do it for certain reasons, but in reality, people actually living there, in practice, there are challenges of actually using it as legal tender, as a currency. And so, yeah, I think we just have to investigate into that, and we can sort of imagine what sort of issues would actually present themselves that need to be overcome.